Hi guys, it's Wednesday, April 8th. Yesterday we took a look at duck and cover because sort of the overarching theme of this post-war America is this gnawing anxiety that comes from the Cold War. And we'll certainly look at the Cold War in terms of foreign policy. We'll certainly look at the Second Red Scare in depth as we get into foreign policy. But today we're really staying on the domestic front and we're looking at this post-war economic boom. I know that that's a little bit of a loaded, biased term, as there's certainly a lot of Americans that don't participate in it. But compared to the way things were before 1946, when you look at the war years, when you look at the Depression, this was certainly a much better time for many Americans. There's no assignment that you are turning in for today, but what you gain today is going to give you a tremendous amount of context for what we do moving forward. So I've got 3 short videos. The first one's 6 minutes, and it talks about this post-war boom. As you watch this, here are a couple of really important themes that I want you to pay attention to. The anxiety that came back from basically demobilizing 15 million men that were off fighting in Europe, and would the economy recover? We talked about in World War I how difficult it was to transition from the planned economy of World War I producing wartime goods and the economic disaster that 1919 was in terms of inflation and in terms of strikes. And they talk about how during the first couple of years there really was some anxiety, but very quickly that changes. And a lot of it has to do, you'll learn about the GI Bill. The GI Bill of Rights, what was it, 43, late 43, early 44, it was passed. Bottom line is it was passed before the war was over with some great foresight on the part of the government, and it spurred this economic recovery and the rise of the middle class. Vets got 2 things: access to low-cost mortgages and basically free education. And you can think about how important that is to middle-class development. Is there anything more middle-class than owning your own home, as it's linked to all of the economic boom that comes with housing construction and the rise of suburbia? And then education. We've talked about this a number of times, right? When you invest in your education, you're investing in your own human capital. Capital is defined as anything that's used to make something else. So when you become more educated, and as Paul Fussell is going to say, it's completely democratic. Whether you're studying what does he study? The history of English poetry at Harvard, or as he puts it, a very utilitarian subject in South Dakota. It was, as he says, thoroughly democratic. And so a lot of workers gained a lot more skills. So it talks about the GI boom and consumerism, and it goes into Bill Levitt and Levittown. And it talks about sort of not prefabricated housing, but how Levitt brings the assembly line to the work site where the house is being built, and how suburban homes became so much more affordable. And that first video also goes then into the baby boom. One of the largest the largest demographic shift that we've ever seen, as it talks about how so many couples were married and had kids after the war. The second video really focuses on the rise of the middle class, and it's a good juxtaposition between, this rise in corporate America and then what it meant to be the corporate man. I mean, there's a lot of things that stink. Watch that clip on the man in the gray flannel suit, right? You had a lot of choices of shirts as long as they were white, right? The 2 martini lunch, don't think everybody was getting, banged up during lunch. But it talked about, like, okay, if you were a man and you were having one of these business luncheons, as he says, nobody ordered a Perrier or an iced tea. And it talks about the gross inequities that women faced during this time. And this is important because when we look at the rejection of these values with the counterculture in the late 1960s, I want you to see where they come from. And as we talk about the feminist movement, I want you to see where women were at in corporate America in the 1950s. Then, of course, comes the most important line of the entire time period, where the one guy's talking about his parents saw their little house in the suburbs as a refuge, right? I believe the quote was, the emotional core of the 1950s was all about stability. People were willing to trade off all of this conformity and repression. We haven't talked about the Red Scare yet, because things were so much better for so many people than during the war years or during the Great Depression. As it talks about consumerism and we talk about conformity and materialism, they talk about keeping up with the Joneses. certainly a concept that you've been exposed to in your lifetime. And they'll talk about that. And then the final clip talks about the rise of TV. It's important, guys. We could not underscore the importance of the radio in the 1920s and the role that the radio continued to play during the Great Depression. Television really is born during the 1950s and changes American life. So there's a short clip on that as well. Okay, and again, no assignment for today. You're not turning anything in, but this stuff is critical moving forward to have context for some other things that we are going to do, including what's coming up next with the next 2 days, which is our rock and roll and Elvis assignment. See ya.